Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Virtual Travel Escapes. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, where we're continuing our little webinar series and virtually exploring the world to find some great destinations and some fun places that might be of interest to you guys to dream about where you want to go to next and maybe plan that amazing vacation for next year. Just a reminder, everybody, our webinars are being recorded. So if you've missed any of our previously recorded webinars, please go into paulltravel.com/webinars and you'll find all of our other presentations that we've offered over the course of the last 20 months. So there's lots of great presentations there. So please take a look and view that. And also, I'm almost remiss to introduce myself. I'm Rhonda Svian, the Leisure Manager at Paull Travel, and my beautiful, as always, lovely co-host, Julie Bekdashe. Hi, Julie.
Thanks, Rhonda, and hi, everyone. Welcome.
Now, before we get into today's presentation, I just wanted to let you know that our next virtual escapes, we're going to be going and following some island breeze and some sunshine, and we're going to be showcasing Bonaire. So that's going to be December 17th. So a little bit of different date. It's on a Friday and it's at 10 a.m. in the morning to kind of accommodate our special guest. So keep a watch out for the registration information in your emails about that. So now today we are going to be showcasing Scotland. Oh my gosh, Scotland, what amazing country. I know I was thinking about it. I was in Scotland many moons ago, back in the day when I worked for Ward Air. I know I'm dating myself. I actually lived in London for 3 months and worked for Ward Air there. And then every weekend, every chance we got, we would explore and just get on a train and go somewhere. And Scotland was our favorite destination to visit. It was so great. So that's how long ago it's been for me. So I'm really excited about today to learn a little bit more about, maybe what's new or just kind of revisit those memories that I had. And Julie is going to be hosting next year a fabulous tour with Royal Irish Tours as well. So I'm really excited we're going to touch base or touch on that a little bit today as well and go through the itinerary. So I think you're all in for a treat. Julie, I'll turn this over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Rhonda. Wow, I didn't actually know you lived in London or worked for Ward Air. So look at us learning something new about each other. That's awesome, and definitely a time for you to go back. Yeah, and I'm super thrilled today that Jonathan's joining us to go through Scotland and just what there is to see and do, what Scotland's all about, and this fabulous tour that we've handcrafted, put together. So I'll introduce Jonathan to you. He is actually from Dublin, Ireland, is where he was born. He's been living in Canada for about 10 years. He studied tourism and marketing in university and came over to Toronto, and he worked for the Irish Tourism Board, and he worked for a couple other different companies, but has been with RIT for the last 3 years. He is in his spare time, he loves rugby and hiking and loves to travel, obviously. And Jonathan, you have a 4-week trip planned back. Hey, when is that going to be?
Yeah, so it was supposed to be a 4-week trip, but I was just telling Rhonda before we started, I'm actually leaving this Saturday, flying to England. So doing England and Ireland, and hoping to do 3 days up in Edinburgh as well. So
wow. Oh, awesome. Good for you. You'll have to let us know what it's like at Christmas time there.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I'll hand it over to you, and feel free to share your screen, and we'll take some questions at the end.
No problem. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining, and thank you, Julie and Rhonda, for that lovely introduction. So today I'm going to focus just talking about the lovely, lovely country of Scotland. I myself have been many times. And of course, being from Ireland, there are closest Celtic friends over the road in Scotland. And so a bit about Royal Irish Tours, or RIT, the company I work for, as we're known. We are a Canadian company specializing in Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. So that is all we sell. So we really are experts in those destinations. A lot of people have Scottish roots within our company. Our groups manager, for example, is married to a Scotsman. There's a few Scottish people in our reservations team, and we have our own office now in Scotland, which is fantastic. So work closely with all the hotels and attractions throughout the island. But seen in the picture there is the Isle of Skye. And this is really a very iconic scene that many people think of when they think of Scotland. But it really is like that. You could be driving around an island or up in the Highlands or in the more remote parts of Scotland and maybe not see another car or another coach or another person for 10 or 15 miles or kilometers. Just an update on the current COVID regulations for Scotland and for people who are looking to travel next year. As of December 2nd, there's of course still a PCR test upon arrival and when you get to Scotland, but there's no pre-departure COVID testing. Of course, this all changes quite frequently, so we're hoping by the spring next year that many of these restrictions will have been lifted. But if you are fully vaccinated, there is only quarantine until you get that negative result for the PCR. And that's only been kind of tightened in the last few days. They're just trying to keep things under control for the winter. But very high vaccination rates in Scotland and the UK in general. So you can see Scotland is the best performing. This graph is actually about 2 weeks old, so it's even higher than that now. I believe it's nearly at 93% of the population of Scotland are fully vaccinated. That's over 12. So there's pretty much no vaccine hesitancy in Scotland, which is great. And especially in more of the rural areas, the Scottish Islands and the Highlands, there's been very low rates of COVID. So that's fantastic. And Scotland is open and really very much ready to welcome back guests in 2022. And we're very excited. And so I always like to start these presentations with, I suppose, why Scotland? A better question is often why not when you see scenes like this. This is the Outer Hebrides seen in the background here, but there's so many beautiful islands and different locations to explore. Perhaps not the reason people go, but the reason they definitely want to come back. It's always the people, the music, and the food. The people are absolutely fantastic. No matter where you go, you'll meet really friendly locals, and that's what travel's all about. It's the people you meet along the way, whether you're having a nice Highland dance or just having a quiet wee scotch in a bar. You'll meet lots of friendly locals along the way, whether you're doing a driving holiday, coach tour, no matter the tour style. The food as well, obviously being an island, the UK has some incredible seafood, but also their animals are mostly organic, out grazing. 10 or 12 months of the year. Perhaps in some of the northern parts of Scotland, they're not out grazing on the fresh grass 12 months of the year because they do get a good bit of snow the further north in the likes of Shetland and the Orkneys. But for the most part, it's very temperate, which results in really lush green landscapes, which also results in some really fantastic food. And we really pride ourselves on that farm to fork element in Scotland. So everything you're eating in any of the restaurants, bars throughout Scotland is generally sourced 10 or 15 miles from where you're eating it. Whether you're having a local scotch, you'll often drink a scotch you've never heard of. There's nearly over 200 distilleries throughout Scotland, and they really pride themselves on supporting the local industry there in terms of the food, and something you'll certainly be blown away with when you get there. And of course, the music. We always like to include Scottish entertainment evenings on our tours, but whether you're doing your own trip in any of the cities or just looking for a quiet music session in a bar, and that's certainly something you'll get in abundance on any trip to Scotland. And of course, the nice wee towns and villages you visit along the way. I actually took this picture when I was in Glencoe a couple of years ago, a really, really nice little village on the way up to Inverness from Edinburgh. It's about halfway between Edinburgh and Inverness. And there's loads of little craft artisan shops, thatched roof cottages. I had a lovely soup and a sandwich in here. As well as buying lots of little ornaments to bring home as well. But a really nice visit. And if you're ever doing a coach tour, generally your breakfast and evening meals will be included. Lunches are generally on your own. So you always like to visit little towns like this along the way. And there's so many hidden gems throughout Scotland. Glencoe will be one of the more well-known little villages. But whether you're in the west or the east or further north in the Highlands, you'll visit so many beautiful towns and villages along the way. And of course, the iconic scenery and history, whether it's exploring a 12th or 13th century castle, or just driving along and seeing some castle ruins on the side of the road. There's so many of these unique experiences, and that really is what travel is all about. And you'll certainly get these in abundance in Scotland. Of course, the history, lots of people here in Canada with Scottish roots. nearly 10 million with Irish and British ancestry. Throughout Canada, I believe it's over 3 million with Scottish ancestry. So lots of people almost feel like they've come home when they arrive in Scotland, even though they may never have been there. And they really do get that warm welcome when they get there, and exploring that history is one of the highlights of any trip to Scotland. And of course, a good chance to meet the locals. I took this picture as well, just after coming off a cruise on Loch Ness, where I didn't see the Loch Ness monster, but I got to see a few of these lovely Heeland cows, as they're known. Heeland coos, as the locals would call them. But you'll see these dotted around the landscape as you go. You'll see lots of different breeds of sheep. You'll see lots of different wildlife, some deer in some of the national parks, especially in off the beaten track hikes or more northern parts of Scotland. But as well as the local people, the local animals are also friendly. And again, a very idyllic setting and thing to see when you're there. And of course, the local delicacies. I haven't touched too much on Scotch yet, and I'll be touching a bit more on that when I go through the lovely handcrafted itinerary that Julie has put together. But there's so many Scotch distilleries, as I mentioned. I was in Dalwhinnie here in the picture on the left, had a nice tour and tasting, as well as a pairing with some lovely chocolates. And again, you get to learn a lot about how it's made, learn about the angel's share and all that as you go through these distilleries. And of course, the food is certainly something to die for when you're there. So in terms of what we sell at Royal Irish Tours and Royal Scottish Tours, we also had that brand for a while, but we've kind of rebranded to RIT. We do sell coach tours and driving holidays, as well as sightseeing tours and smaller group tours. But really, there's so many different ways to explore the destination. There's a great train service as well. So lots of people maybe fly in and out of London. It's only 4 hours by train from London up to Edinburgh. So it's very accessible from other parts of the UK as well. It's only a hop, skip and a jump across the pond from any European city. So it's an hour flight to the likes of Amsterdam or Paris from Glasgow or Edinburgh. Between Glasgow and Edinburgh themselves, it's only a 45-minute drive. And over from Ireland, it's less than an hour in the air. So it's very accessible and a great starting point for any European vacation. But when you are traveling, it's great to have that local knowledge. And we work with local guides and drivers throughout the country, and they really do add to the experience, whether you're doing a chauffeur drive, a driving holiday, or a coach tour. Using a local company and a local guide really adds to the experience. We do tend to have a lot more inclusions than many other operators as well. So it's always great to have included evening meals in some of the hotels, and they really do pride themselves on fantastic food in all the restaurants and bars as you go throughout the country. Historic cities, and I always like to tell the story about visiting Edinburgh a few years ago. I was doing the hop on, hop off bus throughout the city, and I always recommend that when you are in those cities. It's a great way to learn a bit about the city if you have some free time. There's always guides on each of the buses. They leave every 10-15 minutes from different parts of the city. But they were talking about the history, and then they were talking about the area where I was staying, which was the new town. And I asked the guide how old the new town was, and he said it's about 250 years old, and that was the new part of Edinburgh. So Edinburgh did have one of the highest populations in Europe back in the 1700s, at the start of the Industrial Revolution. It was kind of almost a focal point of the whole of Europe. A lot of industry in there, and it's really amazing when you go to the likes of Edinburgh Castle and see the old cobbled streets, and there's some 500- or 600-year-old pubs hanging around there as well. And there's just so much history in the cities, perhaps none more historic than Edinburgh. Of course, there's two other great cities in Scotland, Inverness, which is the gateway to the north, which I'll talk a bit about later. And of course, Glasgow, which is the largest city, which is another lovely visit. A lot of the air access from Canada tends to be into Edinburgh or Glasgow, but whether you're starting a tour in Edinburgh or Glasgow, it is only 45 minutes between each of the cities. So very easy to get around Scotland, as I said. The Scottish Islands as well. It's definitely a bucket list experience for many people when they're in Scotland. This picture here is of Isla, which is kind of claims to be the home of Scotch whisky, although the other 4 Scotch regions in Scotland might argue that they're the home of it. But it really is beautiful. And on any tour or visit to any of the islands, you'll get that beautiful scenic views, as well as beautiful little fishing villages, lots of hiking, walking, biking, whatever kind of interests you. There's so many things to do and see, but Scottish Islands are definitely a highlight of the trip. There's a few Scottish islands that pretty much closed off to the rest of Scotland at the start of COVID. So they pretty much have had no COVID cases or anything. But what a nice place to isolate, I would say. Well, maybe not for everyone, but I'd love to isolate on a nice Scottish island. So they're all open and welcoming visitors again now, but definitely a must on any trip to Scotland. Visit one of the over 1,000 islands they have between the west, east, and north of Scotland. And I touched on it already, the iconic experiences you get on any trip through any country, but you certainly get these in abundance, whether it's the history, whether you're tracing your ancestry or just meeting locals. You get so many iconic experiences throughout Scotland. I keep saying Canada. A wee dram at a whiskey distillery, definitely a bucket list experience for many people. And if anyone joins Julie's group next year, you'll be visiting more than one distillery, that's for sure. And there's so many historic towns and villages as well. I've touched on the likes of Glencoe. This is St. Andrews here in the background, of course, hosting the British Open next year, and which is, of course, a very popular event, but it's even more popular whenever, I think it's once every 10 years, it's in most places, but St. Andrews gets it once every 5 or 6 years sometimes. But a really, really amazing golf course. A very historic little town. Any coach tours we do will always stop in St. Andrews for lunch on the way back for at least 2 hours to really get to explore it, go in and get to the famous picture on the 18th hole in St. Andrews, go into the gift shop and just walk around the lovely town. It's got one of the largest universities in Scotland, St. Andrews University, and it's a really, really beautiful visit and only about an hour north of Edinburgh. So really nice visit. Farm visits as well, again, another authentic thing to do in Scotland. And I know there's a lot of farmers, here in Canada, so it's really nice to go see a working Scottish farm. And you can do this in many countries around the world, but it's amazing in Scotland to see the sheepdogs rounding up the sheep with the local farmer and see, learn a bit about how they do it in Scotland. Farming's obviously different all around the world, but it's amazing kind of go to an authentic Scottish farm. You go to farmhouses and get lunches and different cooking experiences, and there's many different things you can do on these farm visits. But we always like to include the sheepdog performance at King Craig, which is on the way to Perthshire from Inverness. So really, really nice visit as well. And I've touched on the history, but it's great to visit Gladden Battlefield in the north, which is near Inverness, which was actually the last organized battle on British soil between the Jacobites and the Brits and the English. But visiting a lot of this history and then going up to the likes of the Outer Hebrides, to the Clava Cairns, and seeing the ancient stone circles, which some are 3,000 or 4,000 years old. Is really another amazing thing to do in Scotland. In the Culloden Moor, in the battlefield, you can actually stand on the battlefield. You see where the British soldiers and the Jacobite soldiers would have stood, and it really is a very moving experience just to go out to the battlefield. In the actual museum, every 30 minutes they kind of will come out and do a theatrical performance and split you into Jacobites or English, and kind of reenact what would have happened on the day of that fateful battle all the way back in the 1700s. This is just a map of Scotland, just to give you an idea of how small the country is, how easy it is to get around. It's not the greatest map, but you'll see from Glasgow to Edinburgh in the south, it's only a 45-minute drive between each of those cities. From Edinburgh up to Inverness, which is the gateway to the north, it's only about a 3-hour drive. Same from Glasgow to Inverness. The likes of Fort William, Dundee are nice stops on the way up that way. Getting over to the islands on the west coast, Isla in the south, that's about 2 hours from Glasgow, including the ferry trip. And then Isla Skye is about 2 hours from Inverness. There's islands further north, the likes of the Orkneys, which would be, and the Outer Hebrides as well, which would be a couple of hours further north. But you're looking at about eight or 9 hours to get from Glasgow to the very northern parts of Scotland, and about 5 or 6 hours to get from one side to the other. So in a 10-day, 2-week vacation, you really can see quite a lot of the country. And that's not something we can say in Canada here. You'll barely get out of your province on a 10-day, 2-week vacation if you're trying to see lots of different towns and cities. So in Scotland, you really can see quite a lot in a 10-day, 2-week trip. In terms of what we sell, I did mention briefly, so escorted coach tours as well as the smaller group tours, which are maximum 16 guests. And if you want to do your own independent holiday, I touched on the train. It's a great network within Scotland. But there's also drive-in holidays where it's fully independent, customize and do your own thing. And that's a good way to do it if you're comfortable driving on the left. And of course, chauffeur drive is your own personal driver guide with you for the duration of the trip, or however many days you book them for. Lots of people will often do city stays as well, whether it's with us or just booking through Paull Travel to do a nice city stay in the likes of Edinburgh or Glasgow or any of the major cities. A really nice starting point if you are perhaps doing a further European vacation, do a quick 3 or 4 night stop in a city like Edinburgh or Glasgow is a really, really nice thing to do. For some of the more northern parts of the country, I always recommend, if you're not comfortable driving, to do some of the tours that go further north, the sightseeing tours. These are the max 16 guest tours. So generally leaving out of Edinburgh, but there are some departures out of Inverness to get up to those kind of smaller, more off the beaten track areas. Orkney doesn't get that many people coming by land. It does get a few cruise ships coming in every summer. But Orkney is a really, really nice place to visit if you have the time to get up further north. And then Julie, of course, put together a really exclusive Scotland tour, which visits lots of whiskey distilleries, as well as doing lots of other great experiences in Scotland. So I'm going to talk a bit about kind of some of the things they do day to day on that. And even if you're not going to join this tour, hopefully it'll give you some inspiration on some of the great locations and things to see and do in many of the different parts of Scotland. And of course, we'll have lots of time for questions at the end as well. And so just in terms of that tour, she is going to run it from June 4th to 13th in 2022. So really high-end tour with lots of inclusions. I won't mention all of these, but you can see there's lots of great inclusions as well. But definitely, if you're a whiskey enthusiast, it's a great tour to do. Tour and tastings of some of the more historic places like Ardbeg, which would be one of the most well-known distilleries, founded in 1815. Coolala. I was looking at how to pronounce this distillery earlier, and there's a lot of expert speakers and things still get it wrong. But a lot of people say Isla because it's Isla, but it's Coolala. So another really nice visit, lots of tours and tastings. Then day one, as I said, most people coming into Scotland generally arrive into Glasgow or Edinburgh. So that day is arrival into the airport. We always like, if we're doing a tour, and I always recommend this, anyone coming into Scotland, not to try to do too much on day one. You've obviously taken an overnight flight from Canada, coming from Edmonton or anywhere in Alberta. You're probably looking at a connection in either Calgary or London, or perhaps both. So by the time you get there, you need to acclimatize, maybe stay a night or two in Glasgow. We do a nice panoramic tour this day and visit St. Mungo's Cathedral in the background there, which is the patron saint of Glasgow. A free afternoon at leisure, and then a nice early dinner and a chance to explore some of the wonderful shops, restaurants, bars throughout Glasgow. Again, this is a lovely picture of Loch Lomond seen here in the picture, and there's so many wonderful lakes to explore. So on this day of this tour, it's a quick trip around Loch Lomond before heading on a ferry over to Isla, which is one of the best whiskey areas, and a nice visit to Ardbeg distillery, and a lunch en route, as well as a dinner and overnight at the McCree Hotel Golf and Links on the Isle of Isla. But Ardbeg, one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland, and it's really amazing to visit a distillery. Even if you're not a Scotch drinker, that's founded in 1815. Ardbeg will be one of the smokiest and peatiest of the whiskies, but there are so many great whiskies to explore throughout Scotland. Gin distilleries have really taken off in the last 10-15 years, I would say, as well. So if you're a gin enthusiast, Scotland is a great place to go. A lot of kind of distilleries, while they're waiting for the Scotch to age, which has to take at least 3 years. Some of the best Scotches take 12 to 18 years in Scotland, but gin can be produced in 1 to 2 days. So a lot of them have really perfected the art of gin, and you'll often see the names of gins and vodkas as well in many of the bars that perhaps you've never heard of before. So I took this quote off the Ardbeg website. And it really is amazing how passionate they are about the crafts they do, whether it's Scotch distillers, or farmer, or a local restaurant owner, or someone running a tourist attraction in one of the cities. They really are very passionate about what they do. And Ardbeg has been called as close to perfection as makes no difference by whiskey connoisseurs. So they really put a lot of passion into what they do, and you'll find this as you go throughout Scotland. No matter what someone's craft is, they really put a lot of love into it. Day 3 of this then is the chance to explore the lovely Isle of Isla, as well as visits to 2 more fantastic distilleries, as well as a free afternoon for exploring the area. Again, another very historic distillery founded in 1846, which literally means the sounds of Isla. And this Scotch is used very much in blended whiskies. 95% of it goes to the likes of Johnny Walker Black and many other blends, which are very popular here in North America, of course. And free time to explore the glorious Isle of Isla. So if you get a fresh day, it's really nice to go for a walk along some sea cliffs, and maybe go for a swim if you're brave enough to swim well, you're bordering, it's probably the Irish Sea still, but bordering on the North Sea there, so very chilly water, but a really, really nice thing to do, and explore some of these islands. Many other distilleries as well included, as well as Bunnahaven on that tour as well. Historic towns and villages I touched on a bit earlier. In day 4 here, we'll go to the lovely town of Oban. Anyone interested in the Oban distillery, it's a really nice thing to do. But this is a lovely fishing town, just really nice to kind of wander around, explore the old historic buildings, visit many of the local bars, restaurants, coffee shops. And what's good about towns, villages and cities in Scotland, they're all very compact and small. So in 1 hour, you can kind of cover the whole of Oban, kind of wandering around. It's great to get lost in these little towns and cities as well. If you're interested in seafood, especially in kind of the west coast of Scotland, many of these little villages and towns will have fantastic offerings. Then traveling north to the Highlands on day 5, and the lovely town city of Inverness, which is the gateway to the north. A great chance to visit Urquhart Castle, which is a lovely 13th century castle right on Loch Ness there. And I've actually taken the boat cruise before, which goes from about an hour south, and you go right up to the castle on the boat cruise, and then you get off the boat and have a chance to explore this 13th century castle. And it's really amazing that these castles are literally so ancient, and a lot of the walls are still remaining from the 12th and 13th century, which is really incredible when you visit this castle. And then you arrive in Inverness, which is the gateway to the north. So if you are looking to visit many of the northern parts, this is a great starting point. As I said, it's about 3 hours from Edinburgh to Glasgow, and very accessible on both the coach or by train. But on this tour, you get a chance to stay in this. Again, a very walkable city again, right on the river. Lots of really great cool shops. There's a really great Highland tweed shop in there. I can't remember the name of it, but it's one of the best Highland tweed shops I've gone to. I bought myself a nice jacket when I was there. So really, really great city again to visit. As well as whiskey, which is very popular. There's lots of great breweries and other kind of artisan producers. So Black Isle Brewery is something that's visited on day 6, as well as visiting Nakando Wool Mill, which is a 230-year-old wool mill where you see a handcrafted loom, and you can see a loom demonstration, as well as learning about that trade, which was one of the biggest industries in Scotland back in the day. So again, there's that great mix of kind of history and very interesting facts you learn as you go throughout Scotland. And even on a whiskey tour, which most people think when they go to Scotland, you get to visit some very interesting breweries and distilleries. This brewery, again, they still have their Scottish roots. Many of the beers are aged in whiskey casks, barley wine and cherry butts, sour beers, Brett beers, and then some Baltic porter in Heaven Hill bourbon barrels, and some very unique organic beers. And it's really amazing. There's so many entrepreneurs throughout Scotland running these quirky industries. Then day 7, you get a chance to see that King Craig sheep farm and the working sheepdog performance, as well as going to a winery and cidery. as well as going to the battlefield on Culloden Moor as well. And then coming down to the very historic Carnoustie Golf Hotel and Spa, which perhaps maybe the second or third most popular golf course in Scotland after St. Andrews. So really, really nice hotel and resort. But again, just experiencing that history on the battlefield in Culloden is something you won't soon forget. And then also visiting that very quirky winery and cidery, which again is just local entrepreneurs have turned this lovely kind of farmhouse and farmland. Instead of farming animals and vegetables, they've started farming the ingredients to make these really fruity ciders and wines throughout there. And then coming down in the west, there's lots of great cities. Sorry, in the east, the likes of Aberdeen, coming down through Perthshire and Dundee and Falkland. Get a chance to explore 16th century Falkland Palace, as well as that historic visit to St. Andrews, which I touched on earlier, and then an evening at leisure and to experience Edinburgh. And then as well as walking the cobbled streets in Edinburgh and getting that tour and tasting. Sorry, no tour and tasting. Getting a walking tour to really experience the cobbled streets and the history. And in many of the major cities throughout Europe, it's always a really great way to kind of get a feel for the city, do a walking tour with a local guide, and then kind of have some free time to explore on your own. Edinburgh Castle, no matter where you are in Edinburgh, it's a highlight of any trip there. You can see it from pretty much anywhere. Anyone visiting in August has a chance to go to the Edinburgh Tattoo, which is the military tattoo, which is very popular. And we'll be back in 2022 after 2 years of not being able to operate. And so we're very excited to welcome people back to Edinburgh for that tattoo. But going into Edinburgh Castle is an amazing experience, and you get a lovely guided tour when you go there as well. And then the Spirit of Scotland, which is a really nice way to finish any trip in Scotland. We always like to do Scottish entertainment evenings, but you can also book these if you're on just your own vacation there as well. You can book through Paull Travel, the likes of the Spirit of Scotland, and where you see some Highland dancers, some very Scottish music, and they're using the bagpipes as well. And there'll be singers. If you don't want to get up and sing or dance, make sure you don't make eye contact with people on stage, because they do like to grab people from the audience to bring them up and to explore and get you singing as you're there. So that's just a quick overview of that tour. And I hope you've learned a thing or two about Scotland, just to give you a brief overview of some of the wonderful things to see and do when you are in Scotland. There is a minimum of 14 people that will be going on that tour. And of course, you can contact Julie for more information on that. But a big thank you to Rhonda and Julie for having me on, and for all of you for coming on. And I hope that was somewhat informative about Scotland, gives you a wee taste of what you will be able to experience, whether you're traveling with Julie or just on a general tour in Scotland that you book through Paull Travel. And there's so many wonderful things to see and do. And I'm very excited to get back there. Hopefully there's not too many restrictions around Christmas, and I plan to go up to Edinburgh, as I said, for at least 3 or 4 nights. That's
awesome. Can't wait to hear about your trip, Jonathan, and thank you so much for doing such a fabulous job of showcasing Scotland and the tour specifically. So yeah, any of your agents at Paull Travel can book into this group. So if you have any questions, just contact the office or myself. But yeah, you did a great job. I know there's going to be a lot of tastings, a lot of drinking, a lot of walking, a lot of beautiful sightseeing and shopping and history. It just kind of has a little bit of everything. And I know that June is supposed to be a fantastic month to travel to Scotland, and even the accommodations are excellent. So looking forward to that. We'll see if, I don't think we have any questions at the moment. You did such a good job, Jonathan. Nobody has any questions. Rhonda, is there anything that you are wondering about or had any questions on?
No, just like you said, Julie, Jonathan, you're very thorough, and it definitely is enticing, and it really gives us a great overview of what to expect. I tell you, I want to go back soon. And Julie, I think I want to go on your tour. Yeah, my goodness, that looks pretty fabulous. Yeah, no, it's really good.
Good. Yeah. And I think that's such a big part of it, Jonathan. I think until you've been, it's like, okay, what are we going to see? And you talk about all the different things to see, but it's actually the people that you remember most. And, that warm welcome. I love the culture of the singing and the dancing and just casual, friendly people. I think that's really just that fact of feeling so welcome is really going to be a highlight of the trip.
Yeah, and I always find when people come back from Scotland, it's not talking about, the amazing castle they visited or the amazing scenery they saw. Those are obviously highlights, but it's those conversations or those experiences they had in the pub or, experience at breakfast with chatting to a local in the restaurant. Those are the kind of experiences they generally tell their friends about.
And that's what travel is all about, isn't it? It's about those experiences. Those are the memories that you have when you come home, like you say. The places you stay are great, but it's those like, local experiences, the tastings, all of those things that are unique and different. Those will stick with you for sure.
Yeah, different characters that you meet and those Highland cows. I can't wait to see those. Little bit obsessed, I think.
They're so cute.
But that's great. I don't think there's no more questions. So just fantastic job, Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining us, taking the time to share your experiences with us and our special Paull Travel guests. So I wish you the best afternoon, everybody. All the best, and we'll look forward to seeing hopefully everybody in the next couple weeks at our next presentation. Okay, thank you.
Have a great day, everybody, and safe travels, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.